Maybe I'm going too fast and let's go back. Ooh. There we go. I got to find out which one works at this point. So let's walk through this. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to ask. I may not have the answers to everything because, as I said, my interest doesn't lie with detailing history, as I'm sure from experience with you folks that it probably does. Let's see here what happens. Okay. Well, one of the things I learned, let me say this too before I get started, and I don't know if you'll need a speaker with me or not. Someone asked if you could put and you can, that's fine. But one of the things that I did is commission, first starting out in Chattanooga with an individual, a seal for the Graysville. And that didn't work out. I gave them all the history and laid out very vital things to put in the seal, and it didn't turn out well. So then I went to Keener here in town, and they did a phenomenal job. There was a lady working with them. They did a super job putting together a seal, and I speak to this right now just to say I was amazed that in short order I put together very critical aspects of Graysville for that seal, because I got reaffirmed in doing this work for you. Okay, we'll learn here, right? And so one of the things I learned when I was on the Bicentennial Committee is that really this was the land of the Cherokee Indians. And much of Rhea County was or much of at least Tennessee, maybe not Rhea County, was North Carolina and so on. So some of those things I gleaned from there. It appeared that, land grants and other things brought people to the Graysville area. And the primary focus there seemed to be agriculture and someone suggested a horse farm after apparently was the second postmaster of Graysville. So there had been at least a small community developing during the primitive time of Rhea County post-Cherokee Indian involvement. Graysville is actually a settlement and a commerce hub, and it was initiated by coming of the Cincinnati Southern Railroad. And, that makes perfect sense. You've got to have means of getting goods there and means of getting your product out. And, that was somewhere around 1880. But there were things going on in Graysville right around that time that involved a lot of things like the actual purchase or establishment of Graysville. And so Billy Gray was the second postmaster there in like 1878. So that even predated the railroad coming there. But in the seal, you will see that a train engine is a primary factor of our seal. Because without that, I doubt you would have much to do with Graysville. I think another very important element, however, was the fact of natural resources there. We bordered on the west side by a mountain that was rich in coal at the time. And, wherever you have work and wherever you have natural resource, if you have a means of getting it out of there or getting necessary things there to produce it, you're going to have growth. In addition to the coal mining, there was clay discovered on what is now we call Lone Mountain. And both of those were used for tiles. And I went into a house in North Chattanooga that was a humongous house, beautiful home, just as you turn the curve on Hickson Pike going into North Chattanooga. And the thing that really impressed me was that instead of masonry blocks, they were clay blocks. That whole house, the whole external aspect of that house was made of. And in retrospect, I'm thinking, was that mined on Lone Mountain? I don't know. There's a prominent name in Graysville, John Wesley Klaus. He was a surveyor, and he's credited with the founder of Graysville. And the way he started knowing this little community was by the postmaster. So I guess when he described to someone that he was coming to that community, he probably said Graysville, because he identified with it in that way. But I noted that in this research, Seventh-day Adventists bought their property from Klaus. So did the Methodist Church buy the property from Klaus. So if you look around, I would say some of the very early deeds will have an indication of this guy's name associated with it. And because he really acquired large land holdings in Graysville, and at least use this to point to. In 1884, William and Henry Fox, and do you remember Mr. Fox in town? William and Henry. I need to be verified with this. I verified a whole bunch of this. Hopefully you'll find it interesting and entertaining when we finish with it. But in about 1884, William and Henry Fox organized something called the Fox Coal Company. And, these were opening the mines on the mountain above Graysville. And they worked for quite a long time. And as it turned out, the reason I said I could relate to this is Bill Fox was an old man when we were young and used a walking stick, and he was still in town, And he was friends with one of the local teachers who was an old maid like me. And so you can see in a small community, as a child, and I was a child at the time, I connected with that. So this came back to mind as I read along about this. Mr. Montague out of Chattanooga then acquired that coal property and operated the mines as Montague Coal Company. And this was west of the main proper Graysville. And the area was known then as Montague, and today it is known as Montague. Roaring Creek, which I swam in as a child, and it's a beautiful area of Graysville to walk. It's beautiful. Yeah, the wash. We all went there to swim, and it was a deep, deep area because that's where they washed coal at the time. And when I was fairly young, and even a little bit older than that, there were still coke ovens at the entrance to that. Yeah, you probably, yeah. There were homes, there was a commissary, there was a hotel. I remember when I was a child, there was Grimsley's store, and there was Miller store, John Miller store, still there. And at the time, someone by the name of William Yancey Denton and wife Victoria Carey Denton opened a hotel there. When the mine sort of shut down and Montague sold the property, they moved into Graysville proper and built another hotel right on, practically close to what was then the depot for the train service. And I knew her as a child. She gave me a pet, a little pet chicken. They had loads of chickens that they had in their backyard, if you recall. And this little chicken would follow me around everywhere. Unfortunately, it followed me out the back door with a real strong scream and got squashed on its way out. Yeah, and that little chicken just took me on as a mother. There was a company physician, Dr. James McKenzie, and he was the brother to Ben McKenzie here. And my understanding is when Montague sold out, he left and went on to Cleveland and finished practicing there. Is there any questions at this point? Don't make them detailed because I didn't pursue this in a detailed way.
Is the Mr. Fox related to Curly?
I don't know. Do you? Yeah.
What about Iris Fox?
They didn't. Iris Fox and the Curly Fox, they didn't relate to him as Ken, as I recall. Iris Fox is a delight. Grew up in the church I grew up in the Methodist church, and I don't know what the association there happened to be. Could be. Go ahead. Thank you, too. Now, Durham Coal and Iron Company, which is very familiar here right in Dayton particularly, and J. Braxton Mansfield became the general superintendent, took over the mines and operated until the 1920s. And then Mansfield and Bud Small, and I remember my aunt talking about Bud Small when I was a child, bought the, pardon?
Is that Wilma's Small?
Could be.
I think it was.
Yeah, but in 1940, the mining operation didn't totally, permanently close down, I would say. It isn't even closed down right at this point, totally. As producing coal, yes, but I remember a friend of the family purchasing the mountain with all those coal mines that I think was sold to the gentleman on the mountain, and it's become more a place to tour or ride Humvees or something today. But his idea was to purchase the coal access to that property.
Mr. Kinslow.
Mr. Kinslow. No, Mr. Kinslow now owns it. This was, I don't know if any of you met the prior mayor of Graysville. No, not Ted, but the most prior mayor of Graysville, which was Ron Scott. It was Ron Scott's cousin that bought that whole mountain area and probably sold it to Kinslow. Dickey Clay Company, and somewhere I have pictures of the Dickey Clay area on Lone Mountain with my uncle, because he was, I think, superintendent of the Dickey Clay Company, and I know my aunt kept books for them. And if I'd have known really where I've stored those darn things, I would have tried to reproduce them for you here, but that was two very vital general areas of growth for Graysville as natural resource that would justify so many people moving in and it becoming such a hub for Ray County in terms of development. Go ahead. Interesting to me was when you have something slowing down as clay and coal and so on, you start looking for other ways. You've all of a sudden got a community of people that need work. And so hosiery mills moved into Graysville. We had actually several of them at one time in Graysville. And gave work to people who could stay, walk. Many people didn't have cars, and so I remember my uncle and I taking groceries to people on the mountain and everything else because they didn't have a car. So we delivered, become fashionable again, I guess. But the mills mostly employed women, but not exclusively. Not exclusively. At present, dry set has been converted to a thread mill, probably employs 10 people at the most. 10 people. But that property was donated to a hosiery mill, Graysville hosiery mill, and I think Graysville hosiery mill converted to the hosiery mill that Kaiser Rock. That was donated by my aunt and uncle and borders my property, and I owned the property pretty early on, and I came home one weekend, I don't know, from school or from work, and Marvin, my cousin, had given a whole road to come to the back of that property on the right-hand side instead of the employees having to go to the left-hand side. And it's like, you gave my property. But, given that there was two purposes that my aunt and uncle, I think, donated that property. One was the people in Graysville needed work. And at one time, there were many people employed there. Your mother was employed there. Yes. And it also, as things were quietening down for the business, then they needed patrons too. So at the same time it was benefiting the community, it was benefiting them, and we also had the services for vending machines, Cokes and so on and so forth. So my aunt was sharp. She was sharp as a tack. In time, by necessity, citizens had to become commuters to Dayton, commuters to Chattanooga. And I really know of cases where no one had an automobile, so they hitchhiked to work every day and every day back. I wonder if their employer was understanding enough for them to be late or something, you know. And I thought that just spells remarkable courage to work and be self-sufficient. But then I thought of a lady in Graceville that's recently died, and I was going to Dayton, and she was hiking. She was living on the prayers of being able to get transport to Wattsboro to work, just as recently. And I know I gave her a ride all the way to the new Rhea County Hospital, and quite often the sheriff's office would see her and help her the rest of the way to Wattsboro. But I thought, phenomenal, phenomenal. Essentially, what does a loss of work mean? It means that the community starts collapsing in some way. And you've seen this out in the South. We've seen it everywhere that an explosion of things that were going on happens, that people ended up having to move to get work. And Graceville became essentially a residential community. Actually, if you go all over, people quite often put Graceville down, and I'm very defensive. Because people say to me, look, you have the resources there, and why are you still in Graceville? And it's because I love Graceville, like you love Graceville. I was reading a note in the post office of your situation and another situation, and people come together in Graceville. If somebody gets in trouble and they don't have money, then there's some kind of benefit to benefit those people. I love that aspect of Graceville. I don't know a bunch of people in Graceville anymore, but they'll quite often ride by and say hi, Kay, to me. Graceville had 3 demarcations, as I remember as a child, and confirmed by some of the research I did. And in terms of communities, it had Montague, it had Graceville proper, and Adventtown. And since I was in Graceville proper and most adjacent to Adventtown, most of my little buddies were Seventh Adventists. And I was in the Pathfinders with Dr. Littell's wife and so on and so forth. And one of my best friends was Ruth Rose, which was long-term Seventh Adventist. So I know a lot about the Advent ideals, and I'll share other things with you in a bit. In terms of churches, and I'll bet you think like this too. In terms of churches, you sort of identified people as being of a certain group based on the church they went to. Most prominent churches in Graceville at the time were Baptist, Methodist, and Seventh Adventist. There was a Church of Christ, but it was sort of a small group of people. And so when I think of people in the history, I sort of collect them based on their faith and where they went to church. And there was Seventh Adventist, Methodist, Baptist, and Church of God. And I'll share some of the aspects of that with you as we move along. And then the other demarcation was families. This family's with this, and this family's with this, and every marriage that occurred, you could still recollect those people to that family. Now, in the days of prosperity and active commerce, there were stores, retail stores galore. There was even a bank, and our post office that the sibling of Billy Gray, Clyde Gray, and his wife ran was actually an old thing, and there was depots. And when I say that, there were not only train depots, but my aunt and uncle had probably the most comprehensive business in Graceville when I was growing up. They sold groceries and delivered them. They sold appliances. They installed pumping systems because everybody had wells. There was no city water at the time. They had the bus station, so they sold tickets and so on the bus stop there. They sold clothes. Dry goods is what my aunt used to call it. So, they even had over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, because at one time there was a pharmacy with a legitimate pharmacist in Graceville, but little things like, those powders that come in the paper tubes and so on, and aspirin and stuff like that, they sold. So it was comprehensive. And during Easter, my aunt made the most beautiful Easter basket that you could ever see. She was so artistic and quite brilliant, let me say, as a businesswoman. And there was a phone exchange. And I had a lot of experience with a phone exchange because I lived next to the phone exchange. And Ruth was related, so we were in and out of that phone exchange a lot. They had a booth that you could go in and talk privately, but that didn't mean you were private. And most of the phones were phones with multiple people on them. But Ruth was a master. You've seen the comedy, and I forget who it was, but she had the long extension cords and you plug it in. Ruth was a master of that. Now, she was a young girl, but she could work that. And did they relish her showing up to get a break from them? And she made it very fruitful because she listened in on people's conversations and know who was dating who that shouldn't have been and what they were up about, and shared that with me. So it was a very interesting time. They made a mistake by turning her loose, but they needed a break. There was also a barber shop, and I got to tell you this story. I was a tomboy when I was growing up, and I was out climbing a tree. It might have been a tree my uncle didn't want me to climb, but I was climbing. My hair was to about here, and he said, "If you're going to act like a little tomboy, then just take this money and go to Homer Beans, who was the barber at the time, Reese Beans' father, by the way." He said, "Just take this money and go to the barber shop and get your hair cut like a little boy." And I don't know, I'm going to share what my thinking was as a child. And you might appreciate this, because I was very convincing. I took the money, got down out of the tree, went to Homer Beans, and promptly told him to cut my hair. And he probably said, "Who sent you here?" And I told him, my uncle. And he said, "How do you want it cut?" And I said, "All of it." And I came back to the restaurant with probably a quarter of an inch of hair all over my head. And my uncle tried to serve me. And I said, "It's me, Kay. I would love, I don't know why I didn't pursue what happened to Homer." But if you knew my mother, what happened to Homer, what happened to my uncle, but they just had to live with it because I had no hair. And when I was thinking of Homer, I have to tell you, I thought of that story, and then I thought, this is interesting too, because that was a community gathering place for men. And they enjoyed conversation among themselves at that barber shop. But I then thought of Homer. Homer went to church with me. Our church was Methodist, and there wasn't a place you could sit. It even had overflow, and it would be full. And all families would be there, and you could associate everybody with a particular family. But poor Homer, he would come in all Bright and under the care of his wife Mildred, and they would sit down in always the same pew. And from the time Virgil Wilkie started his ministry, he would absolutely fall asleep. I mean, it would, every once in a while, Mildred would have to hit him to make him not snore. And every single service, Virgil Wilkie asked him to finalize with a prayer. And he would get up and do a phenomenal job with the final prayer, and we would all sort of laugh at the experience. But that was my memory of Homer at the time. In addition to that, we had a sanitarium. Now, in studying the Seventh-day Adventist history in Graysville, you had a sanitarium on Lone Mountain, but you then had development of the church to the academy to other areas that became used as a sanitarium. I think one started out as a boys' dormitory, girls' dormitory, but I think you remember and I remember. I'm sorry I'm using her, but she's from Graysville. And I remember a 3-story, maybe a 4-story sanitarium that was bordering in terms of west and east to west. It had a direction east to west. And a little friend there, Mary Helen Baggett, was one of my little playmates. And so we had the run of that place. And it was the cleanest place. There were people there in assisted living. There were people there unable to take care of themselves. And if we had a snack, it was nothing ever sweet. It was probably waffles. Delicious waffles without butter or without any honey or anything else. That would be our snack. But the sanitarium was run by Mary Helen's grandmother. And I don't, forgive me, but I don't remember her name. Do you? No.
Crow.
But was it Crow? Yeah, it might have been. Later, the restaurant, when we were out on the highway, would provide for them, for their patrons or clients or patients, chicken. And they would come down and pick it up. And every once in a while, Helen and her sister would feel a little weak and feel they needed protein, and they'd come off and have a steak with us. And now you have that replaced, and by the way, I went into the Seventh-day Adventist Academy. They had some of the most beautiful paper mache figurines that were in there, and of course, it was pretty much open if you went in, and that's where they ran the Pathfinders Club and so on. And we had doctors, Mackenzie, Broyles, Martisons. The Martisons were still in Graysville when we were young. And let's go to the next thing. Maybe you can see I just run all over the place because I'm letting my mind. The most prominent citizens in Graysville probably was Clifford Hambrick, World War II, and Curly Fox. I like to think of my aunt as being pretty damn where I do, yeah. And overall nature of the citizenry, well, I don't know. There was a group of people in Graysville that we knew as Goins. And they are identified as the Lungeons. And apparently across Tennessee and in Chattanooga were profiled as non-whites. And I have to tell you this story. They apparently have been determined to be a tri-racial people, maybe Cherokee, definitely Anglo, and if that's one of the sections, and African. But I was listening to the 5 on Fox, and they decided to do 23andMe. Now there's 5 people on the 5. And out of the 5, there was one person who thought they were mostly Italian that was actually more typical European than Italian, but it was all Italian or that. The rest had 3 profiles. 3 had Jewish ancestry, 3 had black ancestry, and then various other things. And I don't know, Juan Williams is the one black participant in the 5, and he had about 50-50 profile of that, but all were tri-racial essentially, or tri-ethnic. And this would not be that unusual, you know. And, you know, it would be remiss of me to not say this. One of the brightest students I ever had didn't appear to study. Brilliant, now a prominent employee of Chattanooga State, was related to the Coins. And so was my uncle. He married one, you know. So it was not uncommon that they were accepted. They found a haven in Graceville. It makes me proud of Graceville. It really makes me proud of Graceville. And one of the most prominent businesses that we have in Graceville that has never abandoned this dilapidated main road city. The rest of it looks great, I think, but we've got things to do in Graceville, and I keep harping on that is Thurman's heating and air conditioning. I have a special place in my heart for them because they stayed the course with us and employ many people and are competent people, and we appreciate that. The overall citizenry, too, in terms of religion, you know, when I was a child, people really flooded there was enormous participation in St. Edward's Church, in the Methodist Church. You would have to get there early in the Methodist Church to get a seat.
The social life of the town.
Yeah, that's true. It was part of the social fabrics, but you know, it's harder to be nasty to somebody in your community when you go to church with them. I'm now in this situation. So you give them that edge, and isn't that a healthy thing for today? And so I thought of things like that. The Boynes, but also my grandmother was Church of God. And I like to think of them as more a spiritual group, more hands-on. In the Methodist Church, it was well laid out. Our minister was phenomenal as an instructor, and as a child, I didn't know how Helmer could sleep because he could keep me engaged from beginning to end. But the Church of God, for some reason, growing up in the Methodist Church, I went to the Church of God. I hope you're not offended by what I say. My best friend's Church of God, she laughs at me every time. But I went to that church, and there's a lot of activity. And I was scared out of my mind. I mean, I was absolutely petrified. But a really wonderful person was there, and my sister and her daughter were best friends. And I knew that very day that my sister and her daughter had gotten in trouble for something that I knew was misunderstood by this woman. So the preacher gives a message, and he says to the congregation, and I'm sitting back there new to this congregation, he says, a Christian, there's a call for a Christian to come up to the altar. And I'm thinking, I wonder if it's her. And I'm sitting behind her. And so it came up 2 or 3 times, and finally I thought, it's my obligation to, so I poked her. And I tell you, she liked me because she was forgiving over the time that I said, do you think you need to go? But not being a part of that church, I didn't know what the protocol was, but I was worried. I liked her. I didn't want anything to happen to her. My best friend, Virginia, she laughs at that today with me saying that. And then one aspect was legality and morality. And I'll tell you, in Graceville, there were people known to let's say, tickle the tiger relative to, you couldn't get booze, you could get it somewhere in Graysville, maybe in the Montague area. And I know my uncle would tickle the tiger. My aunt was straight as an arrow. But that's a fact. And morality, you really knew people who walked the walk and people who talk the talk, so to speak. Go ahead. Prominent families, my memory, Boltons, Hicks, Smiths. I went to church with your father's family, the Mazzigan, but your mother's family was Seventh Adventist, and your father converted that way. But see, we even knew those kind of things in Graysville. You marry somebody and they have a faith that's different, and what's chosen accordance. So, the Goins, the prominent people, the Barters, and I could go on. If you want to add any, feel free. Okay, all right. That's my memory, and I wrote them down, and I also sort of quizzed my friend Virginia to find out about some of those things. Oh, good. Now, this is going to be the good part here. Hopefully I've entertained you enough with this, but this is my aunt's first business, probably before you remember it. Look how small that is. It's hardly more than a storage building, but it says B's Cafe, and standing in the door there, because I can tell by the way she stands and her arms, that's what was wrong with my batteries. Hang on. Oh, I got something more. This is my aunt. I don't know who that is, but this is my uncle right there, and I believe that's Marvin. But this right here is Clifford Hambrick. And he had sold that guitar, and somebody had it and let him borrow it again. You remember a guy by the name of Wilbur Evans?
Oh, yeah.
He played the spoon. He could really play the spoons. He lived in front of maybe 1,000 steps or so. The rest went there. I'm thinking that's him, but I'm not sure. But anyway, they're there and playing the music, and they take the time. And I don't know who these people are. By the time I was a child, I would say this was 6 to 8 times bigger than that. Because when you were a child, it was much, much bigger than that. So it grew to that point.
Was that the same place as the original?
You know where I built the sidewalk in front of my house? If you're looking at my house, to the right of my house is where that was.
There's a block house now to the right of your house.
Well, it was on my property, where my fence ends.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead. This is the visitation of Clifford and his family, and the little kids at the time, and apparently they had 1 or 2 beds only. So he had married this girl right here. This is Clifford, and I guess they had to share when they slept. I don't know what they did. I was thinking of that. And I remember when the Seventh Adventists got started in Graysville, one of the things they would say when it grew to become a central hub for Seventh Adventists, they asked them to bring their mattress set or something with them to study, as they had to camp out. This is a meeting, and interesting the story, and by the way, I had to do a lot of pursuits and purchasing to get to this point. One of the things I had to purchase was a 1944 November the 11th Collier's magazine, and I have it. It smells a little, but I have it. And this is where these images came from. And they didn't have enough dishes, so the kids had to wait until the adults finished to be able to eat.
They have that in the library at Graysville, don't they?
Say what?
Don't they have that in the library at Graceville?
They may have. Don't tell me that now. I don't know. If they do, I would say probably,
They have some of those pictures, I'm sure, and it's from a magazine. It's not just reprints.
yeah. That might have been the museum.
No, at Graceville, at the library.
We have that exhibit for anthropology.
We don't have those pictures. I had read when I did my newspaper column on him, on Hambrick, that there were pictures, that there was an article done from Collier's magazine.
Yeah. But let's say this, if Graceville doesn't have it, then I'm giving this magazine to Graceville, because you know how I am about that. But if they do have it, then I'll share that with the Historical Society and even Graceville might, if they can assure care of it, I'm sure it'll be in more careful hands in this.
I'd like to copy those pictures if we could from,
Sure,
give, give a reference to it.
yeah. But hopefully we'll get a magazine for you. But this is his visit with one of his aunts and so on. And I'm sure this is Rosalie, his wife, that he took and him. All right? And this is Mr. Kelch, and I forget who this guy was, where he's visiting with them. And you can see the structural aspect and the clothes and everything at the time. This would be in 1944. So they were quite poor people. Okay, next. Having time, partner?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, okay. And this is, I don't know exactly where this is, but they were going to be looking for another house because it was apparently not protection from the cold and the winter, but they were out getting water out of the well at the time. So those were the profiles of pictures that were included in the magazine. Now this is my church, and you know I don't know everybody that's in there, and I could have been in there. I don't know. It depends on when that was, but I know that this property was bought from Mr. Klaus. And one member of this church that was really interesting to me was Kelly, Mr. Elmer Kelly. Why he came to Graceville, I don't know, but he did. But Virgil Wilkie was the pastor, and if there's a heaven and there's somebody that's there, I know that man will be there. He was absolutely precious. And he would help other ministers teach them how to do funerals and weddings and so forth. But he was funny as all get out. He lived life. And two funny stories that came to my mind as I surveyed my mind for him was this. There was a lady in town, her name was Annie, I won't finish out her name. She was in a fire with her children, and in saving them had actually disfiguring damage to her. And apparently she shopped around Graceville for the church. So she apparently went to the Seventh-day Adventist, where she didn't like the Seventh Day. She went to the Church of Christ. She said, she's telling Virgil Wilkie that, by the way, it was a homecoming. She showed up. He welcomes her, and immediately she gives him the story. So she said, well, yeah, thank you. I just thought I'd come today. I've been to the Seventh-day Adventists. I don't like the Seventh Day. I've been to the Church of Christ. They think nobody's right with them. I went to the Baptist. They don't want women to participate. And I thought I'd just come to the Methodist where they don't give a damn what you do. And she says that to him. And he laughs about that. It's like, this is so precious. And he told me this when he told my aunt and uncle this when he was, when I was a child. For me to remember that is just phenomenal. But he was a character. He was a character. This is the school, not the very beginning school for the academy, the Seventh-day Adventist Academy, but the one that was demolished prior to building the brick church that's there now.
Second grade. Yeah.
Did you? Yeah. Well, we used to, Mary Helen and I used to go in, and there was a door right here, you remember that? And the basement down here was, I mean, if you've ever dug a hole in Graysville, there's a whole lake running under Graysville everywhere if you get deep enough, you know. And if you try to, my pool's probably 45 years old, but the rocks that came out of there were just unbelievable. So you can imagine probably men digging this. Did you ever go in the basement?
Oh, yeah, we had a lot of activities, band.
And it wasn't 6 feet high, it was about 8 feet high, wasn't it? Actually, to give work to the students, because they probably had to pay their wages on, they had a hosier mill under there. Did you know that? They had a hosier mill under there. So I think the basement area is still there for the church, but this is pretty much built in terms of the area the church is on right at this time. But they had, this was a classroom, and they had paper mache things in there that were just phenomenal. I mean, you just knew a lot of effort was put into technical training and so on. And I don't want to leave this point without saying this. In my history of Chattanooga State, Southern College, the Southern Adventist College, didn't have a radiography program. We had MRI, we had CT, we had radiation therapy, we had nuclear medicine, we had all of those things. So they would come to Chattanooga State, and if they had a pursuit of ultrasound or MRI or CT, they had to come into radiography first. And many Seventh-day Adventist kids came. Of course, I had my experience with Seventh-day Adventists by my little playmates. And so they came into the program, and I saw the value of the paradigm for Seventh-day Adventists. I saw the value. And the value was that you're going to have to absolutely ground your offsprings in a way of life, of food, and of life, and of honesty, and morals that fit. Some of the best students I ever had that fundamentally had a good basis of moral character were my Seventh-day Adventist students. And as a kid, I didn't recognize the importance of all of that. But you think, you move out of Graceville, you go to Collegedale, you set up places to buy wholesome foods, you provide with McKee Bakery a means for them to pay for their education, and you have a school there that educates them, and so on and so forth, and you have churches all around there, and the population moves there. And when you think about it, a commitment of that sort, I was able to see it pays off. I was able to see that it pays off. This is the women's dormitory. Now, one of these burned, I think it was a men's dormitory. And the suggestion was in some of the writing that was the end of it. But I know that you and I lived to see, I don't know if you lived to see the sanitarium there. It was, as I said, moving west to east, bordering the property there that Gordon's on. Pardon?
The basement is still there, but I believe it's on the right-hand side next to Esther Gordon's place.
Yeah.
At the end of her lot.
The basement is
The
there?
basement's still there.
Wow. Well, that was what I was in. So that 3-story building with the kitchen and everything else actually became the sanitarium. And for some reason, that was no longer on Long Mountain. It could have been, things happen. Maybe the people who bought out the Dickey Clay Company bought that property. I don't know. But that building, there were buildings burned and there were buildings demolished. But a building of that nature, I don't know if it was that one, was on that property when I was a child because Mary Helen and I went all over. Yeah, we did. Yeah. And this was looking at it from the standpoint of Dayton Avenue and the relationship that it sat and so on. Is that pretty consistent with the basement?
Yes.
Okay. And so now I got to tell you a story about this. When I was a child, I guess mother and my aunt and my uncle said, now look, somebody comes in and orders, they had assisted living at this site. So people would leave there and come to the business to maybe have a day out or to eat or whatever. But they told me, now, if somebody comes and asks for a Seventh-day Adventist sandwich, this is what it means. It means a bacon, lettuce, and tomato. So I was instructed to not say one thing, you know, and so I never did. But then I'm also remembering this, and I had a visitor the other day that's Seventh-day Adventist, and he knew who I was talking about, and I had never shared that name. But when I was a child, there was a little brown paper sack. It was about this high, about this wide, and I looked in it, because that's my nature when I was that age. I looked in it, it was a little round canister of snuff. And they told me where to go. So I said I became a snuff mule for the family. So I would truck to this house, knock on the door, hand a little brown paper sack, which I knew had snuff. Gracious lady would thank me, and I'm sure she paid for it in a lump sum some other time. But the minute I told that story, and I never associated a name with it because I was told never, ever do that. They knew exactly. So I had to confess, yeah, it was as they said, you know, she was Seventh-day Adventist, but she just couldn't shake snuff. Oh my gosh. So Mr. and Drs. Mortison's were also Seventh-day Adventists. And I don't know, somebody had some wrong. I was a gopher for the family. So they sent me to Dr. Mortison's to get something called paregoric. And I'm shocked that I remember that. But they gave me in a little vial, a little longer than this, of paregoric, and there was no prescription for it. I just said, this is what they need. They gave it to me. I carted it back. Who got it, I do not know. But it was paregoric, and I'm thinking, that was probably an opiate. Is it? I don't know. Is it? Okay. I mean, I didn't deal with it.
Very strong, but...
Yeah, it didn't take much, so they didn't give me much, but that's the kind of thing that happened at the time. And then that brought me to another story. I thought, okay, the Seventh-day Adventists, I'm reading about this. There was a guy by the name of Gilead. He came into town. Did he come for work? Did he happen on one of those slow trains and see that area and think, let me stop off and visit for a while? But he brought Seventh-day Adventists to Graceville. Gilead? Yeah.
Michigan.
But they said Wisconsin, Iowa, maybe Michigan, I don't know. But sorry about my sniffles, and I'm pretty sure it's not the corona. But anyway, I'm looking at, imagine people put in jail for working on Sunday. And I'm like, wow. And so to my memory came this story. There was a gentleman who sat on the post office of Graceville steps. It wasn't Alvin. Alvin was a decent soul. I'll tell you something about him in a little bit. But it was a gentleman, and he was an exhibitionist. And I know I was with a bunch of kids, and the first penis, the first male genitalia I ever looked at in my life was his. It's a bad memory, but I'm thinking, they put people in jail for practicing faith differently. And they let an exhibitionist go day in and day out. So I asked my friend Virginia, I said, did you ever know about that man? She said, I never was around him because Mom told me never to go around him. He's a dirty old man. I said, dirty old man? Yes. Your mother was right. He was an exhibitionist. And she said, well, Kay, wasn't he in the war? I said, Virginia, nobody ever experiences negative aspects of the war that would deem them an exhibitionist. You might have post-traumatic syndrome, but you're not going to be an exhibitionist. But here adults had to know this man did this thing. Did you ever have an experience with this man? You were up in Montague. I was down there with the action. Anyway, I knew to stay away from him based on that, and I could tell you.
My dad, he probably knew my dad, didn't he?
Yeah. But he, it was unabated for people generally to know that, and why they didn't, did they forgive that man based on the fact that he may have been in World War I? No, you don't do things like that. Anyway, this was the most outstanding building. I went to this school, you went to this school. It was at one time grades from beginning to high school. Excuse me. I think I did my 7th or 8th grade there. Miss Earhart taught me brilliant. I was so lucky to get her. She, you were talking about me carrying those books around. She unlocked my interest in learning. So I carried the books around not because I was so studious or I never had a desire to be valedictorian, never thought of it. I just like learning. And I like learning now, but I'm discriminating, and it's not going to be detailed history like you guys. But this was the most phenomenal. It was as outstanding a architecture as here. It had the most beautiful auditorium. I'm sure you remember that. And help me there, guys.
I can fix the screen here.
Yeah, fix that screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Take me back. There you go. This was, but everything in this country, we demolish things rather than really try to save it, and this is why I admire you so much for investing so much.
Where was this school in Grayson?
This school is exactly where the school now is.
Okay.
City Hall.
Where the city hall is. Yeah, excuse me, I keep calling the city hall the school. But we did do something good for the city in terms of taking the old school that replaced this school, and we got in there and worked we painted. Everybody worked to try to reduce the money as much as possible and converted that till, Jimmy McKenzie said it was the most spectacular courtroom he had ever been in. I agree with that, don't you? And our building is pleasant, and, there's still things we need to do there, but this was a phenomenal building. It's sickening to me that we don't have it, too. But that's what we do in this country, and it works for us. So what can I say? Pardon?
Since the construction date, maybe you know what day it might be constructed? Year?
I know that I should, and I did read it, but I can't remember.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is, I guess Spring City has a similar kind of history. Spring City had a high school built almost exactly like that, and I think it burned in the late 20s, if I'm not mistaken, early 20s, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sitting here thinking, one guy coming through town did the county precision for these schools, and he got the contract, and they look very similar.
Yeah, I noticed Spring City did look like, but sorry, but I think ours was the prettiest. It was like, but you can think that Graceville was the hub of Wright County almost at the time, so some of the best things would be there. But I know the first, what's the grape that grows wine? Muscadine. The first muscadine I ever ate, my first cousin, we sat in you could sit in these windows. We sat in there and he said, it was about this big and it was the most delicious thing I still love. But that's the first muscadine I ever had. You can tell this is an early picture because of the tree. Because the trees when I went there, were well established and huge at the time. I would say somewhere before 1927, you could expect that to be there way before. Somewhere I looked at the first graduating class of that school, and that would give some indication. Sorry, I haven't been as academic as I should have been. Go ahead. This is just to show you a little different aspect of, I think, was men's dormitory. And I should show you this because it brought a memory to bear. I had Graves in 1995, and I don't know, I was about at the point of thyroid storm. We got a nurse in here that would understand that. But Graves, untreated, I remember being at Memorial Hospital in cardiac care, and I thought, something's biochemically wrong with me. This is not me. Because I put a bunch of programs together at Chattanooga State and never got, nothing shook me up. I could have everything in order and still teach all my classes and do all that, and something was wrong. So I called up Dr. Puckett's office, Walter Puckett, cardiologist, diagnostician above all. And I said, tell Dr. Puckett something biochemically is wrong with me. And, I'm not feeling myself, and I haven't been, but it's really disastrous today. Come to my office. I went right to his office. And, I think my heart rate was in the 200 range. And let's put it like this, they didn't want to stick a needle in me or anything else to probably shift me into what is called a thyroid storm. And he said, Kay, you've got a knot in your neck. And I'd never noticed it, but it was very visible. And so instantly he said, you've got an autoimmune Graves. There's a couple autoimmune diseases of the thyroid, and as it turned out, our whole darn body, but Hashimoto's and Graves. But I had Graves and the antibodies for Graves, and so they worked at trying to get my heart rate down and other things down, and didn't even want to check that knot. Went through nuclear medicine, it was a cold nodule. So I'm at my endocrinologist, and he said, well, I think we'll treat your Graves with radiation. And I said, but I have a cold nodule. And he said, yeah. I said, a cold nodule's not going to pick up the radiation. He said, I never thought of that. You're so cancer phobic. Now that we got you stabilized, we're going to do biopsy. I go that very day and they didn't tell me I've got to segue to these hospitals and doctors because I'm sprayed for biopsy. He calls me. I'm on the deck that very day. Look, you've got Hürthle cell carcinoma, but we got to jump on this right away. So, you can have a feeling about yourself where you insist upon a biopsy or something that's malignant. I knew that radiation wouldn't get to that cold nodule. So I ended up having a total thyroidectomy and hospitalization and isolation with radiation therapy. You drink that kind of, you actually swallow a pill for that. But the point I made about this picture that reminded me of this minutes ago was Mary Helen and I went all over the campus. And there was a building, I don't know if it was this building, but possibly in that location, behind what is now the school. And when we went into that building, there was a lady there that was behind, it was a barred place. Very little clothes on, very little furniture in there, and locked up essentially. And I knew it wasn't a jail. But my endocrinologist said there's many people that have been put in a mental institution with thyroid disease. All that was wrong with them was thyroid disease. You can imagine from childhood to hearing that, what crossed my mind. It's like, it's one blow right after the other, but to remember, what did she have? Alzheimer's? Did she have some kind of senility? Did she have a thyroid? My sentiments for her rose dramatically that she could have just had thyroid. What was it? I don't know, but that was my experience as a child. This house still stands in Grayson. This became the Seventh-day Adventist Union headquarters, and I would love to see that house become under the ownership of Graceville and rehabilitated appropriately for the point in time and maintained. Yes. It would be a nice, not just a tourist attraction, but you could actually make it a community center as they has. But it's still there. This was when the boys' dormitory got on fire, and they're dealing with buckets to get a 3-story wooden frame. It's not going to be very successful. They did succeed in getting some of the furniture out and everything. I don't think there was a loss of life, thank God. But we have a phenomenal fire department now. You've been a part of it for years, and you know, you really thank God when you see those people showing up in those situations for Graceville. And it's been successful over many years. And people come to its rescue. This will sort of, I included this picture because you can see where that was destroyed. This looks like the school.
Yeah, that was the school.
Yeah. So I don't know if this was the building or whatever it is.
If you're looking at the back of the building,
Yeah,
on the front of the building would have been facing that school.
yeah. Okay, just to add these because I also invested in the book that you all sponsored. So I've got a lot of money invested in this. I gave my laptop away to one of my nieces. I had to go out and buy a $1,600 laptop. So you don't listen with interest because you cost me a lot of money. This is the sanitarium on Long Mountain. Now, I don't know if this is in the proximate location of the White House that sits on the hill, or if it was in the location from...
It's behind it probably a quarter of a mile.
Oh, okay.
The White House on the hill, and then it's up on the hill over here. So and the spring's still down below it.
Yeah. And there was a cave that I used to go in with my friends, I'm sure, where they could store milk and stuff like that. Okay, next. This is giving you a little different perspective of that. You can say, and this was, go back. Yeah, this was a hosiery mill in the basement of the Seventh Adventist school. And this is sort of the general layout of that property. You can see here's the building we've been looking at. The layout of the property relative to other things that I thought would be interesting for you. You talked about Mr. Klaus, who is actually the founder of Graceville and named it after Billy Gray. This was the first school for the Seventh Adventists. They sort of updated that and made that the first school for the academy. And this was Mr. Klaus's store that he probably abandoned at the time he moved up. He moved to Dayton. Very cool. Now this is, I told you I commissioned the seal for Graceville. You can see the prominence of the railroad. Now I know what you can't see right now is, but it's on our seal, is fox color. And the reason that I'm so impressed with this is that I did this before I researched all of this. I just, quick and dirty, looked at different aspects of Graceville to put together a seal. Because I told Ted Doss at the time, we need a seal for Graceville when we were redoing that building. And you can see that the mountains that are a part of the west part of our city is indicated here. The horse farm, the agriculture. But this is prominent because were it not for that railroad, the history of Graceville, as we've sort of come to understand it today, would never be possible, I feel.
Yeah, you can see it now.
Yeah, oh good, thank you. Yeah, so I incorporate that in there as, how long has that thing been up there?
At least 12 years.
12 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, or more. So and I caught one of those trains as a little kid. I tell you what, I don't know, I rode on that. It was a steam engine down the railroad for as long as I could before it got to that trestle. So me and several of my other little buddies. Now the thing that was wrong at the time, go back. The thing that was wrong at the time, however, was this. So I said, okay, when Keener finished, I brought him what I wanted and what we had done in Chattanooga. And I said, let's take it before the city commission and let them have input as to anything else that needs to be changed based on that history. And so I made sure that we knew when we were incorporated and so on. But this is what got changed. Okay, go to the next one. And you can see incorporated in it this time is the academy. Because the Seventh-day Adventists have had a remarkable influence on Graceville, and it remains today, even though there's fewer and fewer Seventh-day Adventists there. It still is a remarkable history and an imprint of things that we know about Graceville that even exist today. So the only change that was made in the original thing was this little right here. And I think it pretty much represents what I've studied today, based on what we know, and that's what we wanted it to do. Okay, next. Okay, a friend of mine gave me a flat screen. I've got a flip phone, and I'm dying to not leave it. And so they gave me a person I worked with at Chatham State gave me a smartphone. And so I learned how to take pictures, and I went out, and here's a picture still of the house that was the union office for the Seventh-day Adventists that remains there today, that I'm hoping we can one day rehabilitate and make significant to our little town. Okay, next. Now, I wanted to show you some of the architecture of the Seventh-day Adventists. So I went into Seventh-day Adventist town, and many of the structures have been destroyed or they're dilapidated and falling down, but some have been maintained. And here's a little house where there's a younger person, and this was where the Whitemans lived. Remember that name, Whiteman? Married one of the Gordons, remember? Okay. So I think that, look at the structure. Go next. This is another one. It was sort of the architecture of building all these little side things that was sort of significant of the way they did these. Next. This is a friend of mine that I used to work with at earlier. Bought this house. This was the Walker house. And it's more, it has a more beautiful place than this picture depicts. But it's one of the Seventh-day Adventist houses. This is one across the street from there. Some did single houses, but most tried to make use of their space by building up and building side. This house was one of probably it was definitely a huge house. Mr. Morey lived there, the last that I knew that were the last Seventh-day Adventists in town. But whoever purchased this, he's trying to rehabilitate this on the dime. He's doing the best he can, but it's actually a spectacular house, isn't it?
It has a boiler room at the bottom where they used coal to heat the whole house with, 3-story. It was a set up kitchens and a lot of other rooms because it was a dormitory.
Wow. See?
It has kitchens and some of the rooms up there.
So it was a dorm for the Seventh-day Adventist kids? Yeah.
We used to play a lot of fun.
I'm glad you're here. Did you know that? No, you didn't know that. Did someone else have a question? Okay, go ahead. This is another one of the houses, but the way that they structure the roof structure and using the full aspect of the footprint is interesting.
Dave Littell told me that he could tell if it was built somebody from Michigan or somebody from up north, because a lot of the Seventh-day Adventists that moved down, that built their houses were from up north, and they always built that steep
roof for snow.
Telltale sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't really have it down here, so.
Yeah, but I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, next. Now, I got the fourth finger salute taking this picture. The young man who lives there must have thought I was up to no good, and I didn't get a chance to explain to him. I'm trying to detail the input of the Seventh-day Adventists to this little community, but here again is a very unique house.
That's right across from that other one.
Yes, it is. So I got into trouble here. So you can see I started taking things outside. And this is Miss Walker, who still goes to the Seventh-day Adventists here, a Cuban lady who married one of the Walker sons.
Yes. I won't say Henry Walker, but I don't think that's right.
Yeah. But this I think is a cute little house that sits right on the main street. And by the way, the father was a coal miner. And that's why I know that even past Bud Small and all that, people were involved in coal mining that was involved in this, because Brown Gordon, one of the Gordons, and Walker and my uncle were thick as thieves, as they say, and got into trouble quite a bit. I don't remember. No, Paul Walker, yes. But they got into trouble quite a bit, that I've heard, so they were out. Let me say this. No church, no people, we're all human, and we make mistakes, and we're not perfect people. And that's true of the Seventh-day Adventists as well, So some of my Seventh-day Adventist friends that were friends to my uncle got in trouble just like my uncle got into trouble. Let me just let it go with that. Next. This is my house now, and you can see there's a bit of it. And I was trying to remember when I go back to some of the paperwork, I've got to double check this and I haven't had time. But I think this was purchased from Class 2, But behind this house, this is a pretty big size property. Behind this house is where they gave the land for dry set. And then my cousin gave even more land away. That then was mine, right? But we'll have to know that. Now, one of the things we did in Graceville is we focused on, in our library, the veterans of Graceville that have given their life and their health and their well-being to make us free. And so this is just part of, and by the way, Johnny, I can never think of Johnny's last name. Harwood. Johnny Harwood. He and I were sort of at odds politically, but he came to my house wanting me to help him with this. And I said, I will take it on, and we became fast friends.
And I think those handwritten pictures are in that enclosed case.
Well, they are because I put them there. But at the time, I think Johnny had the magazine, and I copied that from his magazine. But see, Johnny is deceased,
Right.
and I didn't know how to get it, so I went on the internet and bought the magazine just to have.
Several months ago I saw it.
Yes. So yes, that did come from his magazine, and we put it there because we knew people shouldn't touch it or anything. But my cousin is in this, Margaret here, Jerry Phillips, is in this, and others we asked to verify and put it in there. You can go to the next one. So now this wall occupies two sides, and it's a long part of the wall, but we also left space down here for this. So I did this for the city. I even took that picture. Actually, the original of that picture was done by my art instructor, and it was beautiful. So I took a picture of it, and then we put it here. And this is a picture of a flag and stages, and the Liberty Bell. And then this is my cousin, Bill Miles, Clarence Miles. He made this eagle out of, he cut it out. He worked for Aztec and everything. He cut that out and did that for us. And then these are the various flags of we're going to have to find a flag for the space system now. Okay? Any question about any of this?
Where is that?
This is in the library of Graceville City Hall. Sorry. Go ahead through this. And this is in the courtroom. And so as a follow-up to that, sometimes I get burnt out and quit. And then I come back, so I did this for them again. It's to make sure that people come in that courtroom realize the sacrifice that veterans have made for us. Okay? Now, this brings me to another topic. In this courthouse, I purchased I had framed, I paid for the installation, setup, and so on in the main hallways, and I talked to Mr. Davis about this. And it was the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and later, I guess, the Emancipation Proclamation and so on. And my interest to you, because I understand it was your decision to change those, my appeal to you is to salvage those documents and use them somewhere in this building, preferably. If that's not what you want to do, I would prefer they be given back to Graceville. But I did the same thing for Graceville, except we didn't have the format or the place to put quite as big pictures. And this is the same. These are on parchment paper. Do you all know about that? Could you fill us in on that, Mr. Davis? Those pictures of the Constitution, everything that were...
That was done for the bicentennial, if I remember.
I was on the bicentennial committee. I purchased those. I framed those.
Right.
And I actually helped install them with the supervision, and it was approved by the county commission, and the Bill Ray Patton was the county executive at the time.
Yeah,
Do we know what happened to those?
Yeah, they're stored with our material.
Okay, so you do plan to use those. Nothing could be, they're beautiful things that you put up. And I'm not being critical, but how could anything be more important than our founding documents? So it's my opportunity, this is one reason I said I would come here. My opportunity to lecture you a bit on that. You know, when people, I endowed a scholarship at Chattanooga State for radiography students, and when you endow or you give, it ought to be precise that things can't be changed unless certain things are forfeited by the people who donated it. So I would appreciate that, and I'll help you in every way I can, even though I'm not the historian you people are, as you can tell. Go ahead, Matt. This is our courtroom. Now back here, see, what I was going to do is also give pictures to the courthouse of these, and these are phenomenal pictures, and I came by those by accident. Many of these prints are of the Revolution or the founding of gatherings for the beginning of our country, and they are spectacular, aren't they? Yeah. Can you come in? Can you get in on it? Well, maybe that's the best we can do. But I put those up. Not only do I get these things and I frame them and I install them. Can you do it? Can I do that? But anyway, these are spectacular prints that I put in a simple way that really adds to our courtroom. You all need to visit the City Hall and see some of this stuff. You've been there and seen. Do you think they're nice? Our courtroom and our setup there. I am so proud of that. Yeah, go ahead. And this is looking from the back up to the front. Here's our seal. Here's the state of Tennessee seal. And this is our courtroom now, and our general meeting room. And it is spectacular, and I'm so proud of it. Next. These flags, too, I won those at a Republican get-together, and, well, I bid for them, and I won it. This is one of my paintings that I put at the front entrance, and this chair and so on. And I turn that back. Yeah, I did this. I'm sort of good at artificial fish tanks. I really am, using acrylic water. And so that's there. I took that recently home and cleaned it up and like that. Yeah. But I mean, this is wild. It's not in giving with the rest of the thing, but I thought it perfectly fit the tone there for some reason. Okay, go ahead, next. And this is the front of the old school building, which has become the City Hall. Now, much of what I've shared with you is from my memory. And, I have to tell you this. Looking and reading some of this stuff, I'm thinking, from your perspective. And I found errors in spelling or pictures that weren't of the people I knew them to be and so on. And, it's nice to have proofreading and so on. So you can be the judge of me, but I'm a person who quit school in first grade. And I plotted to do that. I mean, I'm telling you who I am, so you can judge what I've said here today based on me. I plotted to do it. Now, my birthday's in January, so they probably sent me to school at 5. And I thought, I am not ready for this. I have got to work myself into this to not come back. I succeeded. Probably a lot the way I succeeded in talking to Homer Bean into cutting all my hair off. I mean, why would you take the word of a child to cut a girl's hair off? I don't know. But he was a good old soul, and I don't think he would have if I hadn't been pretty convincing. And I'm also the person, my cousin used to carry me everywhere, take me to the bank with him, put me on his shoulder. So we left Graceville in his car. At the time, it didn't have seat belts, and I remember getting into that car and I'm thinking, I wonder what would happen if you press on the accelerator and the brakes at the same time. It was driving me crazy. I go to the bank, we do all the things on the way home. I'm overcome with it. I'm just overwhelmed with thinking about it. He starts to pull into the driveway to the garage. And I get off the seat and come down, and he's got his foot on the brake, and I go like this on the accelerator. And he is fighting for all there is in the world to stay and not demolish his car. And he succeeds, and we go through, walking through that yard behind that restaurant like crazy. He said, Kay, why did you do that? I said, I wanted to know if you push on the brake and the accelerator, what would happen? And that's about the look he gave me, and then we went on about our business to the restaurant. And then in another situation, you've heard of hydrocarbon pneumonia, haven't you? I saw my uncle, the only person that sold gas in town at the time was Brown Wood. And so my aunt and uncle, they did everything. It was the most comprehensive business in town. Hoover's had groceries and stuff like that, but if you wanted to jitterbug, listen to the music, play the pinball, be entertained, have something to eat, buy some groceries, get some overalls, or do anything like that, you can drive the bus to Chattanooga and come back, whatever the case might be. And, I lost my train of thought. What the hell was I saying? Anyway, in terms of my memory for that, what I did is I saw my uncle siphoning kerosene because we still get kerosene. And I thought, I want to try that. I got it going, but I aspirated it. I mean, a copious amount of it. I couldn't speak. It took my voice. I'm sure I had aspiration pneumonia at the hydrocarbon pneumonia, which is worse than aspiration pneumonia. It's very, I don't know how my lungs survived all that. I don't know, but they finally got me so I could talk to them and smell the kerosene on my breath, I'm sure. So I'm just telling you the kind of person that I was and why my thoughts went in this direction as a child, because mostly what I've shared with you is my child memories. So the history of Graceville, I don't know who wrote the history of Graceville for the Graceville Elementary School, but it was excellent. Was it you? I don't know who it was, but it gave me the foundation that I could feel confident that what I knew from my experience with Graceville was pretty consistent. And I wish I could give credit to the person who wrote it, but I don't know who it was. Churches and Schools of Rhea County, Tennessee, Rhea County Genealogical Society. I bought that book. There was a girl during the bicentennial area in Graceville that had the book. She loaned it to me, but I gave it back to her. So then I called her up when you asked me to do this, and I said, "Do you still have that book?" She said, "Yes." So I said, "Well, are you interested in loaning it to me or selling it to me?" She wanted to sell it. So I gave her $100 for it. Well, it cost $60 originally. Or that was what was in the book. Anyway, it was worth it.
Another one was sell it to you, what, for 50?
Okay, well, hers cost 60, and she needed a businessman that works in the library, so it was no problem. The Graceful Melungeons by Raymond Evans. The reason I told you about myself and the way I thought and the fact that I quit the first grade, by the way, the second grade, I thought that's not going to work a second time. I'm just going to have to get myself down and take care of business. But I don't have to do anything. I've got to go. That's the requirement. But I don't have to do anything. So when the third or fourth grade came into class at midday, I delegated my work to one of my mother's best friends. And it was precise and beautiful. And I thought, I never thought of that as cheating, but they delegated to me, so I wanted to delegate to somebody else. I was in the third grade, and I remember Miss Glover, while clearing her throat, it was like, oh, it drives me nuts, I wish she wouldn't do that. She was asking questions, and other people knew it, and I didn't. And I thought, this is the time I've got to finish this foolishness and be a serious student. And but I went back and looked at my grades, and they were all good. I must have really fooled everybody for so long, But anyway, I took off, and just so you know, I'm a speed reader now. But anyway, the Graceful Melungeons, his assessment, although accurate in some way, I thought, this could have been Dolly Parton, your question. Because he was talking about people saying hit for it, or tar for tire, and so it's like, I hear this now even a little bit in today's time, so what's so unusual about that? And the fact that they did marry and was accepted by the community and not other places made me feel good about the situation. Graceful Battle Creek of the South, I thought I had to go to Dayton Library and read that thing. And I ran into a genealogical enthusiast, let's put it like that, which interfered with my trying to read that book quickly to deal with this. So I got online, and it's online now. You probably, if anybody does know, you all know it's online, so I was able to read it at home.
Is this that red book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's available apparently at the College Hill campus. And then Collier's Smoky Mountain Boy by Harry Henderson and Sam Shaw. By the way, I think Rhea did a nice job with the Graceful Battle Creek of the South.
Yes.
And, well, that's all I've got to say about that subject.
Where did you get that picture of the Breezeville Methodist Church and what year it was?
I got it out of the book.
That school book?
I got it out of the Historical Society book that they were telling us about.
That one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what year it is?
I don't. I know Emmer Kelly was, Emmer Kelly used to run the hosiery mill. And now Emmer Kelly was a member. And I thought, I never knew that he would be a member of Graceful. Did you? Was it your mother or your father related to the Kellys? Mother. And anything else here?
How did you mention Klaus? My dad, Klaus, when he adopted those 6 kids and my cousins and stuff, that was the Klaus house there, the yellow house, when we moved on Bridge Street, because I remember that name, Klaus.
I think all right.
Yeah, and I wish we had that more.
Yeah.
That was just a
Yeah.
thing good at the time. But yeah, it was a Klaus house.
Yeah.
I remember that name when you said that. Wow.
Yeah.
It was fine.
Yeah.
Has all the kids.
Yeah, his mother and father, his mother's sister lost her life tragically, and the father lost a life, and they took him 6, and you all were.
It was 2 of us then, and my little sister came in later, so it was 9 total, but 8 at the time.
Yeah, and a loving home. It was wonderful.
Character you had mentioned is Alvin Goins.
Oh, well, I forgot to tell you this story. Thank you. I forgot to tell you this story. I don't know if I was home if it was a weekend or if I was home from work. I was the only person in my house. And I got a shower, and I'm hearing noises in my house. And it's like, no, at the time we didn't lock doors. I do now. But we didn't lock doors, so I was drying, and I put on a house coat and some slippers, and I came to the living room, and I found in a roll Miss Gracie Patton. Gracie was the first offspring of one of the first Goins families that came to Graceland. She had sitting on that couch her sister Lizzie, her husband Mr. Hambrick, and I know more who they are now. I knew Gracie, but and then Gracie and Alvin had an elderly woman living with them that they called the old lady. They were old too, but that's what they had. They were sitting like a little roll of ducks on my couch, and I'm like, I don't have any clothes on under this. So I said, what? Gracie said, we just came in because we're scared of the storm. I didn't even know there was a storm. And she said, we were scared over at our house, so we came to your house. And I'm like, okay. And that minute, that second that she finished that statement, lightning struck my house. Lightning struck the main electrical incoming to my house. And you could feel it lift. It didn't lift the house, but it was that kind of compression, and fire, and it was obvious. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do with these people? I want to get this, and this, but what do I take care of first? So I chose for them. Mr. Hamley grabs my hand. I don't have a stitch of clothes underneath. I have this house coat on and house shoes. He will not let go of my hand. I walk him out the front door, walking down the steps. We get to the side of the house leading to my grandmother's house behind me. I didn't know what to do other than take them there. They weren't going back home. We were in like a little row, and he's holding on to me with all, and he says, we've left the old lady. I look to the right, and coming down the stairs of my house is this old lady trying to negotiate on the way down. Oh my God, we're all on the other side of the house. Finally, she called up, and we marshaled all of them to the other house. I quickly went back to my house, called the fire department. It didn't really set anything on fire, it just ruined my main thing, but that's the kind of thing that would happen in Graceville. And Alvin, if he would catch me home, quite often want to ride to Dayton, and he made one mistake. He packed that mouthful of a lot of tobacco and set it out, and of course I'm a dermophobic, and that spit went all, it was a blob, and I thought, that's it for you. But Alvin was a savant, maybe. I don't know. Ted Doss was telling me that he calculated the bricks that would be needed in some construction. I think it might have been high school here in Dayton.
In Graceville.
Was it in Graceville? But then they chastised him because they said, look at all the bricks we've got left, Alvin. This is, you made a mistake. He said, well, T, honey, you didn't tell me they'd be news.
How many days old, minutes, seconds that I was, can't believe it.
Did you check him out?
Oh, I was a kid and I looked out of everything.
Well, I said to somebody that told me all that, I said, well, how do you know he was right?
The number of cross ties between Graceville and Dayton also on the railroad track. You calculate the number of cross ties.
Yeah.
And did you check him out to see if he's right?
My sister says that she used to write letters to Graceville.
Back to the men.
Well, he had me do that too and read letters, in which he would keep he had a blue jean coat on with overalls, and he would keep them back there. But he was a good soul. he was a good soul, he was honest, and he was a good soul, he wasn't an exhibitionist. And the reason I brought that to mind is Ted Doss told me, he told Ted, he said, I'll give you a dime if you'll wash my back. I don't know how often he took a bath, but not often, I can tell you that, from having driven him in the car. But Ted said, yeah, I'll do that for 10 cents. And so he pulled Ted's hand down into the water, and Ted took off like a lightning, so he didn't get his 10 cents. And I said, well, Ted, why do you think he did that? And he said, well, it wasn't anything negative, because he was a good soul, nothing like that. He just didn't want to pay me my dime. Anyway, it's been a pleasure. I hope you all find those things I did and keep them. They searched it. There are founding documents, and the framing of them is consistent with this building. And I would appreciate you using it. And I feel strongly about that. Strongly. And thank you, and all of you. I wish all of us have a healthy outcome to all of this, and pray for it. But we can take this opportunity to say there are things that we weren't doing for this country that's a part of our life, our health, our safety, and our financial health. Now we have a chance to look at that and say, look, we need to be making our own medicines, not from beginning to end, every aspect of those medicines. And we also need a system that's not antiquated like the CDC had, that wouldn't allow people to transfer the testing. So, paradigm shift is probably going to improve all of us, and maybe it's something that was necessary for the future, because you think of biological weapons and radiation weapons, it becomes more realistic today than it ever was. Anyway, thank you very much.